You have 15 minutes to explain why my father's company is on your phone call, or you're finished here. Camille Hart runs her father's company with a wariness she inherited the hard way. Ethan Cole is the strategy director, who has never once given her a reason to doubt him, until the day he does. When a secret phone call catches him off guard in the middle of a board meeting, Camille fires him on the spot, certain she's protecting everything her father built. By midnight, she will learn exactly how wrong she was, and exactly how much it will cost to fix it. Chapter 1. The Call You Won't Explain. The boardroom on the 41st floor of Hart Industries had glass walls on 3 sides, which meant that everyone on the executive floor could see Camille Hart standing at the head of the table, with her arms crossed, and none of them could hear a word she was saying. That was, for the moment, a mercy. "Say it again," Camille said. "Slower this time." Ethan Cole did not look away from her. That was the thing about him that had always unsettled the rest of the board. He never looked away. Not from difficult numbers, not from angry shareholders, not from her. He stood on the other side of the long table with his phone face down beside his laptop, and his jaw was set in a way that told her he had already decided not to answer. "I can't tell you who called," he said. "Not right now." Richard Kane, seated at Camille's right hand, made a small sound in his throat that was somewhere between disbelief and satisfaction. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, and had sat on the board since before Camille was born. Her father had trusted him. That was supposed to mean something. "He can't tell you," Richard repeated, "because the person on the other end of that call works for Meridian Capital. I have a source inside their office who confirms it." "Camille, this is exactly the pattern we warned your father about 8 years ago before—" "Don't," Camille said, and the word came out sharper than she intended, because everyone in that room knew what came after before. Before her father's own CFO had leaked 2 years of acquisition strategy to a competitor and walked away with a severance package and a new job, while Hart Industries spent 18 months rebuilding trust with investors who had started calling the company reckless. She turned back to Ethan. 6 years he had worked for her. 6 years of strategy memos that were sharper than anyone else's, of late nights when he was the only director who stayed until the numbers made sense, of a quiet competence that she had never once had cause to question. She wanted badly for there to be an explanation. She waited for him to give her one. He didn't. "Ethan." Her voice dropped quieter now, meant only for him, even though the whole room could still hear. "I am asking you as the person who has to answer to every shareholder in this building by Friday to tell me why you were on a private call with someone connected to the company that has been circling us for a hostile position for the last 6 weeks. That is all I am asking." "I know what it looks like," Ethan said. "Then tell me what it is." He was quiet for 3 full seconds. Later, she would remember counting them the way you count the seconds after lightning to guess how far away the storm is. 3 seconds felt like an answer in itself. "I can't yet," he said finally. "You'll have to trust me." Richard leaned forward, and something in his posture reminded Camille absurdly of a man leaning toward a fire to warm his hands. "Trust," he said, "is not a strategy, Camille. Your father learned that the hard way. You don't have the luxury of learning it twice." She hated that he was right about the shape of the danger, even if she suspected somewhere beneath the panic climbing her throat that he was wrong about the man standing in front of her. But the room was watching. The board was watching. In 4 days, she would stand in front of 200 shareholders and explain why the company her father built was safe in her hands. And she could not do that while the man who wrote her strategy decks was taking secret calls from the company trying to swallow them whole. "You have 15 minutes, she said. 15 minutes to explain why my father's company is on your phone call, or you're finished here." 15 minutes came and went the way water goes over a falls, steadily and then all at once. Ethan spent them standing exactly where he was, his phone still face down, his eyes still on her, saying nothing that resembled an explanation. When the 15th minute ended, Camille felt the entire room turn to look at her, waiting for her to be the CEO her father had made her, instead of the woman who had for one unguarded moment wanted to believe him anyway. "Security will walk you out," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had practiced not shaking for 6 years. Ethan closed his laptop with a click that seemed too loud for the glass room. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice or list the 6 years of work he was owed an explanation for. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, and for a moment, his eyes moved past Camille to Richard, and something passed across his face. Not fear, exactly. Recognition, as if he were looking at a hand of cards someone else had dealt him, and seeing finally who was holding the rest of the deck. Then he looked back at Camille. "You're going to find out I was protecting something," he said quietly. "I hope you don't find out too late to matter." He walked out past the glass wall, past the assistants who had stopped pretending not to watch, past the elevator bank, where he did not once look back. Camille stood very still until the elevator doors closed behind him, and only then did she let herself sit down, because her legs had started very slightly to shake after all. Richard put a hand on her shoulder, brief and paternal. "You did the right thing," he said. "Your father would be proud." Camille did not answer. She was looking at the closed elevator doors and thinking that her father, more than anything, had taught her to notice when a man was too comfortable in a room where someone else had just lost everything. The rest of the afternoon dissolved into the ordinary machinery of crisis. A statement to legal, a call to the head of investor relations, a closed-door conversation with HR about severance terms that Camille barely heard because she kept replaying Ethan's last sentence in her head. "You're going to find out I was protecting something." Protecting what? Protecting whom? He had said it like a man laying down a bet he was certain he'd win, not like a man begging for his job back. By 6 o'clock, the office had mostly emptied, the way it always did, department by department, until only the lit windows on the executive floor remained glowing over the city, like a handful of scattered stars that had forgotten to go out. Camille stayed behind, going through the strategy files Ethan had left on the shared drive, looking for something she didn't know what. A confession? A denial? Anything that would make the last 2 hours make sense. What she found instead was a folder labeled Meridian Do Not Circulate, dated 3 weeks earlier, containing nothing but a single memo with most of its contents redacted, visible only to Ethan's own login. She stared at the header for a long moment before her laptop timed out and locked her back to the sign-in screen, and no amount of guessing at his password brought her any closer to the truth. She thought about calling him. She got as far as opening his contact, her thumb hovering over the number, before she remembered the look on Richard's face when he'd said, "This is exactly the pattern we warned your father about," and put the phone back down. "He'll come to me," she told herself, "if there's really something to explain." She did not yet understand how wrong that assumption was, that some men, once accused, decide silence is the only dignity left to them, and wait to be believed instead of asking to be. She locked her office at 8 o'clock, rode the elevator down alone, and did not know that 4 floors below her in the lobby security office, a very small, very frightened woman named Priya Anand was watching the elevator numbers descend, wondering whether tonight was the night she would finally find the courage to tell someone what she had seen Richard Kane do 3 weeks ago with a stack of financial documents and a shredder that wasn't supposed to be running after hours. Chapter 2. The Numbers That Don't Add Up. 2 days after Ethan Cole walked out of the building, Camille sat at her father's old desk. She had never quite brought herself to call it her own, going through the financial packet meant for Friday's shareholder meeting, and found a number that did not agree with the number beside it. It was small. It was the kind of thing that would slide past almost anyone. A projected revaluation figure for the Western Distribution Division listed at 4.7% growth in one summary table and 4.2% in another, 3 pages later in the same document. A rounding error, she told herself at first. Then she remembered, with the particular clarity of a memory surfacing at the wrong moment, that Ethan had flagged this exact division 2 months ago in a strategy memo, warning that its numbers had been massaged for optics before a previous board presentation, and that someone should audit the raw data before it went out under the company's name again. She had read that memo. She had initialed it. She had assumed, because Ethan always caught these things, that it had been handled. Now Ethan was gone, and the number was wrong again. She spent 40 minutes cross-referencing the raw distribution figures against the summary tables herself, something she would normally have delegated without a second thought, and found 2 more discrepancies, smaller, easier to miss, but pointing in the same direction. Someone had adjusted the projections upward before the reports reached her desk. Not enough to be an obvious lie, just enough to make the Western Division look healthier than it was right before a shareholder meeting where the company needed badly to look healthy. She sat back in her chair and thought about who had access to those files before they reached her. Richard Kane's office was 2 doors down from hers, and at 4:30 he appeared in her doorway without knocking, the way he always did, as though 6 decades of being welcome in this building had worn a permanent path through its politeness. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I keep telling you, Camille, you don't have to carry all of this personally. Let the interim director handle the smaller fires." "There isn't an interim director yet," Camille said. "I fired the last one 2 days ago." "About the acquisition timeline," Richard said, settling into the chair across from her desk without being asked. "I think we should move faster than we discussed. Meridian's people have made it clear their offer for the Western distribution assets won't stand indefinitely. If we can get board approval to sell that division by end of month, we lock in a valuation that protects the rest of the company from further exposure." Camille looked at him for a long moment. 2 days ago, the mention of Meridian Capital in the same breath as her company had been reason enough to end a man's career. Now here was Richard, the man who had made that argument, pushing to sell an entire division to that same company, using numbers she had just found reason to distrust. "I'd like to see the full valuation model before we take anything to the board," she said carefully. "Of course." Richard smiled, the kind of smile that had reassured 100 rooms of nervous shareholders over the decades. "I'll have finance send it over first thing tomorrow. But Camille, the sooner we move, the sooner this whole ugly week is behind us. Your father built this company on decisive action. Don't let one bad hire slow you down now." He left before she could ask him why he seemed so eager to close a deal that would hand a chunk of Hart Industries to the very company he'd accused Ethan of secretly talking to 2 days earlier. She sat with that question for a long time after he'd gone, turning it over the way you turn over a stone in a stream, looking for what's underneath. It was almost 7 when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. Ask Ethan about the call he took in the boardroom. Ask him who he was really talking to. He was trying to stop something, not start it. Please, before Friday. No name, no follow-up when she tried to reply. The number came back undeliverable within seconds, as though it had been created and destroyed for the sole purpose of sending those 4 sentences. Camille read the message 11 times. She told herself it could be anyone. A disgruntled employee, a rival trying to sow chaos before the shareholder meeting. Even, absurdly, Ethan himself, sending an anonymous plea because he was too proud to send one under his own name. But something in the specific phrasing, he was trying to stop something, not start it, sat wrong in her chest in a way that felt less like manipulation and more like the truth finally finding a crack to slip through. She thought about calling him again. This time she got as far as 3 rings before she hung up, furious with herself, because what would she even say? "I fired you in front of the entire board 2 days ago, but an anonymous number just told me I might have been wrong, so I'm calling to ask you to explain yourself after all." Her pride, which she had inherited from her father in equal measure with his company, would not let her make that call yet. Instead, she opened her laptop and began quietly, methodically, to build her own model of the Western Division's numbers from the raw data up, the way she had learned to do in her first year out of business school, before she'd had a company to run and directors to trust. It was slow work. It was 2 in the morning before she found the second layer of the problem. A vendor contract renegotiated 6 weeks earlier at terms slightly worse than the previous agreement, routed through a shell entity registered in Delaware that shared an address with 3 other shell companies Camille had never heard of. She wrote the address down on a legal pad, twice, as if writing it twice would make it mean something she could act on. Then she closed the laptop because the meeting was 2 days away, and she needed desperately to be clear-headed for it. And she told herself that whatever this was, she would have time to understand it before Friday. She did not yet know how wrong that assumption was either. Chapter 3. A Name from the Shadows. Ethan's apartment was on the 7th floor of a converted warehouse near the river, the kind of building he'd bought when Hart Industries stock options had finally been worth something. And Camille stood outside his door at 8 o'clock on Wednesday evening with her hand raised to knock, unable for almost a full minute to make herself do it. When she finally did, he opened the door, already knowing it was her. She could tell by the lack of surprise in his face, as if some part of him had been waiting 3 days for exactly this. "Camille." He didn't step aside to let her in. "What do you need?" "I need you to tell me who called you," she said. "I need you to tell me the truth, because I have spent 3 days finding numbers that don't add up, and a message from someone I don't know telling me you were trying to stop something instead of start it. And I need to hear it from you before Friday, because Friday I have to stand in front of 200 shareholders, and I cannot do that not knowing whether I fired the one person who was trying to warn me." For a moment, something in his face softened. She saw it. The flicker of a man who wanted badly to give her what she was asking for. Then it closed again like a door pulled shut against weather. "I can't," he said. "Not yet. There are people who could get hurt if I say the wrong thing to the wrong person right now. And I don't know yet whether you're the wrong person, Camille. You fired me in 15 minutes without asking a single question about what the call actually was. I asked you 6 times what it was. You asked me to explain myself in front of Richard Kane," Ethan said, "which is not the same thing as asking me the truth in private. There's a difference, and I think somewhere you know that." The accusation landed harder than she expected because it was true, and she had not let herself see it until he said it out loud. She had fired him in that room in front of that board because the room had been watching, and she had needed badly to look like her father's daughter instead of a woman who trusted too easily. She had chosen the audience over the man. "Then tell me now," she said. "It's just me. No board, no Richard." He was quiet for a long moment, and she watched him weigh something behind his eyes. Weigh her, she realized. Weigh whether 6 years of working alongside her had earned him the right to believe she'd act on the truth instead of running straight back to the board with it. Whatever he decided, it wasn't enough. Not yet. "Give me until Friday," he said, finally. "I need 3 more days. 3 more days, Camille said, "and the shareholders vote on selling the Western Division to Meridian Capital. Richard's pushing it through faster than anything I've ever seen him push. Does that mean something to you?" Something did shift in his face then, a tightening around his eyes that told her the name Meridian had landed exactly where she'd aimed it. But he still didn't say the words she needed. 3 days, he repeated, and shut the door, not unkindly but firmly enough that she understood the conversation was over, whether she was ready for it to be or not. She stood in the hallway for a moment, furious, and underneath the fury, frightened in a way she didn't have a name for yet, and turned to leave, and nearly walked straight into a woman coming quickly the other direction, head down a small USB drive clutched so tightly in one hand that her knuckles had gone pale. "Sorry," the woman said, not meeting her eyes, and moved to step around her. Camille recognized her a half-second too late. Priya from the lobby security team, the young woman who had waved her through the turnstiles 100 mornings without either of them exchanging more than a nod. "Priya," Camille said, surprised enough that the woman actually stopped. Do you live in this building?" "No," Priya said, too fast, her eyes flicking toward Ethan's door and away again. I had to drop something off. I should go." "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Priya's hand tightened further around the drive in her fist. For a moment, she looked as though she might say something else. Camille could see it gathering behind her eyes. Whatever it was, rising and then visibly retreating, swallowed back down by fear or caution, or both. I really have to go, Miss Hart. Please. She was gone before Camille could ask another question, moving quickly toward the stairwell instead of the elevator. And Camille stood alone in the hallway with the growing, uncomfortable certainty that she had just watched two threads of the same unraveling rope pass within inches of each other, without quite touching. Back at the office the next morning, Richard was waiting for her with the valuation model he'd promised, along with a revised timeline that pushed the board's internal sign-off on the Meridian sale up by 2 full days, so it could be presented to shareholders as already approved when the vote opened Friday morning, instead of still pending. The board wants certainty before Friday's meeting, Richard explained, sliding the folder across her desk. It'll look far stronger to shareholders if we can announce the sale is already approved rather than pending. Camille looked at the folder without opening it. That's a very fast timeline for a deal this size, Richard. Your father moved fast when it mattered, Richard said. I'm only trying to protect what he built. She thought of Ethan's voice through the closed door. There's a difference, and I think somewhere you know that. And of Priya's white-knuckled grip on that small silver drive. And of a phone number that no longer existed the moment she'd tried to call it back. She thought, too, of her father, who had taught her that the people most eager to close a door quickly were often the ones with the most to hide behind it. I'll review it tonight, she told Richard, and did not tell him that she intended to review a great deal more than the numbers he'd handed her. Chapter 4. The Woman Who Saw Everything. Priya Anand came to Camille's office at 9 o'clock that night, after the last cleaning crew had gone, and the building had settled into the particular hush that only comes after everyone with somewhere else to be has already left. She was shaking, Camille noticed immediately. Not from cold, because the office was warm, but from something closer to the surface, something that had been building for weeks, and had finally reached the point where holding it in cost more than letting it go. I need to show you something, Priya said. And I need you to promise me you won't tell Mr. Kane I was the one who gave it to you. Please. She stopped herself. Please, just promise me. I promise, Camille said, and meant it in a way she rarely let herself mean anything before she understood the shape of what she was agreeing to. Priya set the small silver drive on the desk between them, along with a folded printout of an email chain, her hands still not quite steady. I work security on the executive floor, overnight shifts, twice a week. 3 weeks ago, I saw Mr. Kane run documents through the shredder in the finance office after midnight. A lot of documents, boxes of them, which isn't normal because we're supposed to log everything that gets destroyed, and he didn't log any of it. I got curious. I checked the security footage archive before it cycled out, and I copied what I could before someone deleted the originals 2 days later. Camille reached for the drive, but Priya held up a hand. Before you look, you should know what it actually shows. It's not Mr. Cole selling anything. It's the opposite. She opened her laptop, plugged in the drive, and pulled up a video file. Grainy security footage, time-stamped 3 weeks earlier, showing a private meeting room on the 39th floor, the one usually reserved for outside counsel. Ethan sat across the table from a man Camille didn't recognize, but whose company badge, visible for a fraction of a second as he set it on the table, read Meridian Capital. That's the call, Priya said quietly. That's who he was talking to in the boardroom 2 days after this. Mr. Cole had been meeting with someone from Meridian for weeks, but not to sell them anything. Watch. The footage had no audio, but a second file did, a phone recording, poor quality, clearly taken from someone's pocket, rather than a proper wire, but audible enough. Ethan's voice, low and urgent. I need to know the actual terms of the offer Kane is negotiating with your people off the books before he takes it to the board disguised as an unsolicited bid. If your firm is paying him personally to push this through under a hostile takeover structure, I need proof. Because right now he's about to hand my CEO's company to you at half its value and call it a rescue. Camille sat perfectly still, listening to it a second time, and then a third, her own pulse loud enough in her ears to nearly drown out the recording. Ethan had not been selling secrets to Meridian. He had been trying to catch Richard selling the company to them, personally profiting from a deal disguised as board strategy, structured to look like a rescue instead of a betrayal. The email printout confirmed it, in language too precise to have been faked. A message from a Meridian executive to Richard's private address discussing a success fee, contingent on the Western Division sale closing before the shareholder meeting. Phrased carefully enough to survive casual scrutiny, but explicit enough, read beside everything else, to leave no real doubt about what it was.
"He knew," Camille said slowly. "And he couldn't tell me because
he didn't have proof yet that would hold up, and because he didn't know who else on the board Mr. Kane might have already reached," Priya said. "And because he didn't trust that if he told you, you wouldn't go straight to Mr. Kane with it and warn him before there was enough evidence to stop him." She hesitated. "I think that's also why he didn't defend himself in the meeting. If he'd started explaining in front of Kane that he suspected him of taking a bribe, Kane would have destroyed everything before anyone could prove it. Silence was the only thing keeping the evidence alive long enough to matter." Every piece Camille had gathered over 3 days, the manipulated numbers, the accelerated timeline, Richard's strange eagerness, the anonymous text. Ethan's refusal to explain himself folded together now into a single, coherent shape. And the shape was ugly, and it was true. And she had fired the one man trying to stop it. "I have to bring this to the board," she said. "Tonight, if I can. Before the vote tomorrow." "There's something else," Priya said, and her voice had gone even quieter, frightened in a new way. "I think Mr. Kane knows I've been asking questions. Someone went through my desk yesterday. My badge access got flagged for review this morning, which never happens unless HR is building a file on someone." Her hands had started shaking again, harder this time. "If he finds out I gave you this..." Her phone buzzed on the desk between them, and she flinched so violently that Camille reached out instinctively to steady her. Priya looked at the screen and went pale. "It's him," she whispered. "Mr. Kane. He never calls me." She didn't answer it, but the phone buzzed again almost immediately, and then a third time. And on the fourth buzz, a text arrived that Priya turned so Camille could read it too. "I know what you took. Return it tonight and we forget this happened. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "He knows," Priya said. "He knows I have it." Camille felt something cold settle low in her chest. Not fear for herself, but the particular sharpening fear of watching someone else pay a price for a truth she hadn't yet found the courage to act on fast enough. Richard Kane had spent decades being the man everyone trusted in that boardroom. She had no illusions about how far he might go to protect that, now that the ground beneath him was cracking. "You're not giving it back," Camille said. "And you're not going home alone tonight. Whatever this costs, I'll cover it. Your job, if it comes to that, your safety, all of it. But I need to find Ethan right now, before Kane finds out I have this too, and before that vote happens tomorrow morning." She was already reaching for a coat as she said it, the office suddenly feeling too small, too exposed, too much like a room with glass walls in a building where she no longer knew for certain who else might be watching. Somewhere across the city she knew was a man she had wronged in 15 minutes flat, and a truth that had been trying to reach her for 3 days through every channel except the one she'd been too proud to open first. It was 11 o'clock. She had 13 hours before the shareholder vote. One drive full of evidence that could destroy Richard Kane and save her father's company. And a terrified young woman whose safety now depended on how fast Camille could move. And somewhere in the city still not answering his phone, the one man who might know how to make all of it hold together before morning. Chapter 5. By midnight. Ethan opened his door at 11:40 to find Camille standing in the hallway with Priya beside her, a laptop bag over her shoulder, and an expression on her face that he had never once seen there in 6 years of working alongside her. Not composure, not command, but something rawer than either. "I was wrong," she said, before he could speak. "I have proof. I know about Richard. I know about the meeting on the 39th floor. I know about the success fee, and I know that everything you couldn't say to me in that boardroom was you trying to protect this company instead of sell it. I'm sorry. I need your help to stop this before the vote tomorrow. And I understand if you tell me to go to hell first, but I'm asking anyway. He looked at her for a long moment, and then passed her to Priya, whose exhaustion and fear were plainly written across her face, and something in him, the last of the pride that had kept him silent for 5 days, visibly gave way. "Come in," he said. "All of you. We don't have much time." They worked through the recording and the email chain together at his kitchen table, Ethan cross-referencing them against notes he'd kept from his own 3 weeks of quiet investigation, filling in gaps that Camille's evidence alone couldn't close. By midnight, they had a timeline clean enough to survive a hostile board's scrutiny. But Priya's phone, sitting face down on the table, would not stop buzzing. And when she finally turned it over, she went white. "He's outside my apartment," she said. "My roommate just texted me. Mr. Kane is at my building asking the doorman to let him up." "He's panicking," Ethan said grimly. "That means the evidence is real enough to scare him, and it means we move now, tonight, not tomorrow morning after he's had 8 more hours to bury it." They drove to Hart Industries together, the 3 of them, just past 1 in the morning, and found Richard Kane already there, his car in the executive garage, a light on in his office, the shredder in the finance suite running for the second time in 3 weeks. Camille walked in first, Ethan a half-step behind her. Priya hanging back near the door with the drive clutched once more in her hand, as though letting go of it even now felt like letting go of the only proof that any of this had really happened. "Richard," Camille said, and her voice did not shake this time. He turned from the shredder and, for just a moment, something flickered across his face. Not the practiced warmth she'd known for years, but something colder and far more calculating underneath it, finally visible, now that there was no more reason to hide it. Then he composed himself the way a man does who has spent decades believing he will always be the smartest person in the room. "Camille, it's late. Whatever this is, it can wait until morning." "It can't," Camille said. "I know about Meridian. I know about the success fee. I know you've been feeding them terms off the books for 6 weeks and pushing the vote earlier every time someone got close to the truth." "I have the recording, Richard. I have the email. I know you shredded the paper trail 3 weeks ago and thought that was the end of it." "You have nothing," Richard said. But his hand, Camille noticed, had drifted toward the shredder's control panel, as though some part of him still believed there was something left worth destroying. "A recording made without consent isn't worth the paper it isn't printed on. An email can be read a dozen ways. You'd take the word of a man you fired over the word of someone who has sat on this board since before you could walk?" "I'd take the evidence," Ethan said, stepping forward, "over anyone's word, including my own. That's the difference between us, Richard. I spent 3 weeks building a case instead of a cover-up." Richard's composure cracked further, the practiced warmth curdling into something uglier. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he snapped at Ethan. "This company was going to bleed out in 5 years anyway under her father's outdated strategy. I was protecting the shareholders' actual value, not stealing it." "You were protecting your own fee," Camille said quietly, "and calling it protecting us. That's not the same thing, Richard, and you know it." He lunged, not at her but toward the drive still clutched in Priya's hand, a desperate, ugly motion more suited to a cornered man than a boardroom veteran. And Ethan moved fast enough to step between them before Richard's hand closed on anything. For a moment the 2 men stood chest to chest, Richard breathing hard, the mask entirely gone now. And then the elevator chimed behind them, and 2 members of the company's outside counsel stepped out, summoned by Camille an hour earlier, with instructions to come the moment she called and to bring building security with them. It was not clean. Richard did not simply surrender. He spent the next 20 minutes arguing, threatening, at one point invoking her father's name as though it were a spell that could still make her back down. And it was only when the head of legal confirmed, flatly, that the recording and email were sufficient grounds for immediate suspension, pending a full board inquiry, that his resistance finally broke not into remorse, but into a bitter, quiet fury that followed him all the way to the elevator, where security walked him out through the same lobby doors Ethan had walked through 5 days earlier, though no one in that lobby offered Richard the dignity of silence Ethan had given himself. By the time the elevator doors closed on him, it was nearly 2 in the morning, and Camille discovered, standing in the empty finance office with Ethan and Priya, that catching the man responsible had solved only half of what needed fixing before 9 o'clock. "The recording's authenticated," Ethan said, checking his laptop, "but the shareholder packet still has Meridian's sale listed as recommended by the board. If we don't get a corrected version out before the vote opens, half the room will vote on numbers we already know are compromised." "Then we fix it tonight," Camille said. "All of it, before sunrise." It was not, in the end, easy. The first version of the corrected packet Camille drafted at 3 in the morning was rejected by legal at 4 for insufficient disclosure language. The printer on the executive floor jammed twice. At 5:30, exhausted and lightheaded from coffee and no sleep, Camille discovered a data error of her own making in the corrected valuation table and had to rebuild it from scratch while Ethan fielded a call from an anxious board member who had heard rumors and wanted answers before dawn. It would have been easy in that hour to give up and let the vote proceed on Richard's numbers. With a hasty verbal correction, it would have been enough, technically, to satisfy the letter of the law. Camille refused. By the time the sun came up over the river, the corrected packet was finally ready, accurate down to the decimal. 20 minutes before the printer needed to run its final copies. Priya stayed the whole night, and somewhere around 5 over the third pot of coffee, Camille finally asked her the question she'd been holding back for days. "Why didn't you come to me sooner? You had this 3 weeks ago." Priya was quiet for a moment. "Because I watched what happened to Mr. Cole the one time he tried to tell the truth in the wrong room," she said. "I needed to know you'd actually listen before I risked everything I have to tell you." It was a fair answer, and Camille did not have a better one to offer in return, except to promise, and mean it, that Priya's job, and more than her job, would be protected for exactly the courage it had taken her to walk into that hallway 3 nights ago. The shareholder meeting that morning did not go the way anyone in that boardroom had expected 48 hours earlier. Camille stood at the same head of the table where she had fired Ethan 5 days before, and told 200 shareholders the truth, that a board member had attempted to sell a piece of their company for personal gain, that the sale was canceled, that the man responsible had been suspended pending full legal review, and that the numbers in front of them now were the real ones, verified overnight by 3 separate people who had refused to let a lie stand simply because morning was closer than the truth. It was Ethan, notably, who was not in that room, not because Camille hadn't asked him to be, but because he had quietly told her an hour before the meeting that his return to the company shouldn't be announced in the same breath as Richard's downfall, that the 2 stories deserved to stand apart, rather than be folded into one dramatic reveal. She had understood then something about him she hadn't fully understood before, that, even now vindicated and exhausted, he still thought first about doing things the right way, rather than the satisfying way. She found him instead that evening on the observation deck of the building he'd once worked in, looking out over the same river his apartment overlooked, and for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. "I owe you 6 years of trust I only gave you in the last 24 hours, Camille said finally. "I don't know how to make up for that." "You could start," Ethan said, "by telling me you'd have believed me if I'd explained myself properly the first time, instead of assuming I was protecting myself instead of the company." She thought about that honestly, the way she owed him at least that much honesty now. "I don't know," she admitted. "I think I was so afraid of repeating my father's mistake that I made a new one instead." I judged the silence instead of asking what was underneath it. "And now? Now I know the difference," she said, "between a man who's hiding something to protect himself and a man who's hiding something to protect everyone else. I should have known it 5 days ago. I'm asking you to give me the chance to know it going forward instead." "That's not an apology," Ethan said, though something in his voice had softened. "No," Camille agreed. "It's a job offer. Chief Strategy Officer, Full board authority veto power over anything that touches an acquisition again, as long as I'm CEO. And it comes with an apology attached if you want to hear it properly, which I do owe you, and which I'll say as many times as it takes." He studied her for a long moment, the city lights catching gold in his eyes, the way they'd caught in the glass walls of the boardroom 5 days before, in a version of this story that had ended so differently. "Say it once," he said. "Properly, that's all I need." "I'm sorry," Camille said, and meant every syllable of it, standing there with the whole width of the river below them, and 5 days of near catastrophe behind them. "I'm sorry I let the room decide who I trusted instead of deciding it myself. I won't make that mistake again." He reached out finally and took her hand. Not a boardroom handshake, not a business arrangement sealed, but something quieter. Something that had been building under 6 years of professional distance, and had finally found the one crack wide enough to slip through. "Then I accept," he said. "Both offers." Below them, the city kept moving the way it always did, indifferent to the particular reckoning that had just taken place on one rooftop among 100,000 lit windows. But for the two of them, standing there, as the last of the sunset gave way to full dark, it felt for the first time in 5 very long days like something had finally been set right.